The air is thick with the scent of lilies, the funeral home bathed in soft candlelight. My wife, Maya, stands at the front of the room, her hands trembling as she places a single white rose on her mother's casket. Her eyes, swollen and red, are locked on the woman who raised her, now lying in eternal stillness. The room is filled with hushed murmurs, the weight of grief pressing against the walls. I stand beside her, my fingers gently wrapped around hers, offering silent support. Today is not about me. It's about Maya, about saying goodbye to a woman who sacrificed everything to give her daughter a better life. A woman who fled the Deep South's racist underbelly, determined to carve out a future where Maya wouldn't have to live in fear. And yet, even in death, peace is fleeting. From the corner of the room, I notice a stiff figure standing near the entrance. Karen Whitmore, president of the HOA. Platinum blonde bob, crisp beige suit. The kind of woman who clutches her pearls whenever a black neighbor moves in. Her lips are pressed into a thin line, her arms crossed as she surveys the mourners like a security guard at a country club. I don't like the way she's looking at Maya. There's something in her expression, a mixture of distaste and impatience. I nudge Maya gently. Karen's here. I whisper, PPL. Maya barely glances her way. Let her glare, she mutters. She can't ruin today. I wish I could believe that. Karen has made it clear, in the most passive-aggressive ways possible, that she doesn't think we belong in this neighborhood. The HOA has hounded us with fines. Our porch light is the wrong shade of warm white. Our grass is half an inch too high, and Maya's mother's occasional visits were deemed excessive guest traffic. They never outright say it, but we know the real reason. We're black, and this community, this pristine, gated paradise, isn't meant for people like us. A shadow moves behind Karen. Another board member, Todd Hastings, whispers something in her ear. She scowls. Then, to my disbelief, she pulls out her phone. I stiffen. Why is she making a call? Who is she calling? A sinking feeling settles in my gut. Something isn't right. Maya doesn't notice. She's too lost in grief, shoulders shaking as her aunt whispers soothing words in her ear. I squeeze her hand tighter, my pulse quickening. Karen's gaze sweeps the room again. Then she turns and slips out the door. I don't know what she's planning, but I know Karen well enough to understand one thing. Whatever it is, it won't be good. The funeral director steps up to the podium, clearing his throat. At this time, we'd like to invite anyone who wishes to say a few words about Ms. Evelyn Carter. Maya wipes her tears and takes a deep breath, steadying herself. She's been dreading this moment, but I know she wants to honor her mother. She squeezes my hand once before stepping forward, her movements slow, deliberate. Then the door swings open. 2 uniformed security guards stride in, their presence like a sudden chill in the air. The room falls silent. People turn, whispering. My stomach clenches. What the hell is this? The guards scan the room, their eyes locking onto Maya. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache, steps forward. Excuse me, ma'am, he says, voice low but firm. We need you to leave. A stunned silence ripples through the mourners. Maya blinks, as if she didn't hear him correctly. I'm sorry, what? This is private property, the second guard interjects, glancing down at a piece of paper. We've been informed that you don't have permission to hold this gathering here. Maya sways slightly, like she's been struck. What do you mean? We booked this venue 2 weeks ago. My mother's service. Her voice cracks, grief and confusion intertwining. I step forward, rage simmering beneath my skin. Who told you that? We have a signed contract with the funeral home. The guards exchange a glance. For a brief second, doubt flickers in their eyes. But then the first one sighs. We were given a complaint by the HOA. The HOA. Karen. A slow, burning fury builds inside me. I turn my head, scanning the room. And there she is, standing just outside the doorway, arms folded, watching. She doesn't even have the decency to look ashamed. If anything, she looks pleased. I take a step toward her. Karen, I say, my voice low and measured. What the hell do you think you're doing? She raises an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "Oh, I'm just ensuring the community rules are enforced, Mr. Carter." Her lips curl into a small, satisfied smile. "This facility has regulations about non-resident events. We had no record of a proper booking, and we can't have unauthorized gatherings disrupting the neighborhood." The audacity, the sheer, unrelenting audacity. Maya lets out a small, disbelieving laugh, one that's closer to a sob. "This is my mother's funeral." Karen shrugs. "I understand, but rules are rules." I clench my fists. This isn't about rules. It's never about rules. It's about power, about control, about making sure we know exactly where we stand in her version of this community. The security guards hesitate, sensing the tension in the room. Mourners begin murmuring, some shifting uncomfortably. But Karen isn't done. She steps forward, lowering her voice so only we can hear. "If you don't leave now, I'll have the police remove you." Maya gasps. My blood turns to ice. And just like that, grief turns into rage. Maya stares at Karen like she can't believe what she just heard. I feel her hand tremble in mine, the shock momentarily overriding her grief. This isn't happening. Not here. Not today. I step in front of my wife, shielding her like instinct demands. My voice is low, measured, but filled with ice. "Karen, this is a funeral. You have no right to interfere." Karen tilts her head, all false politeness. "I have every right, Mr. Carter. As the HOA president, it's my duty to ensure the rules are followed. We received a complaint about an unauthorized event, and as such, I'm obligated to act." I glance at the funeral director, who looks as stunned as the rest of the room. "Did you file a complaint?" I ask him. He shakes his head vigorously. "Absolutely not. The Carters booked this venue properly. I have the paperwork in my office." Karen's expression doesn't change. "Oh, I'm sure it was an honest mistake," she says, waving a dismissive hand. "But we can't be too careful, can we? We have to consider the community's concerns." The word lingers in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Community. Their community, not ours. Maya's breathing is ragged now, her grief colliding with a fury she can barely contain. "My mother lived here for 10 years, she says, her voice shaking. "She was part of this community. We've done nothing wrong." Karen exhales sharply, like she's losing patience. "I don't expect you to understand, dear, but rules exist for a reason. Now, you and your guests need to vacate the premises before this gets out of hand." I take a step forward. "And what happens if we don't?" Karen doesn't blink. "Then I call the police. And we wouldn't want that, would we?" The veiled threat is so blatant it makes my skin crawl. She wants the police here. She wants this to escalate, because she knows exactly how that scenario plays out. I inhale deeply, forcing myself to stay calm. "Go ahead," I say, my voice smooth as glass. "Call them." Karen falters for half a second. Just a flicker. She wasn't expecting that. She thought we'd back down, slink away like unwelcome guests at our own funeral. I pull out my phone. "In fact, I'll call them myself." Karen's mouth tightens. "Now, there's no need for," but I'm already dialing. The room watches in stunned silence as I bring the phone to my ear. "Yes, I'd like to report harassment," I say, loud enough for everyone to hear. "An HOA president is unlawfully trying to evict mourners from a private funeral service." Karen's face drains of color. Maya steps closer, her voice steel-edged. "You really don't want to do this, Karen." The shift is palpable. The mourners, who had been hesitant, watching in stunned horror, are now rallying. Maya's aunt crosses her arms. "This is disgusting," she spits. "You should be ashamed." A few other guests murmur their agreement. Even the security guards exchange uneasy glances. Karen stiffens. She knows she's losing control, but she doubles down. "You people always." The room gasps. My blood goes cold. Maya's hands clench into fists. "What did you just say?" Karen quickly corrects herself. "I mean, you people always think you can bend the rules to suit yourselves. But the damage is done." I lower my phone. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Karen scoffs, regaining her composure. Oh, please. You're just another whiny. I cut her off. I'm the state attorney. The room goes deathly silent. Karen's mouth opens, then shuts. The confidence drains from her face like water down a sink. Maya exhales sharply. The security guards suddenly look very uncomfortable. I step closer, locking eyes with Karen. You tried to have my grieving wife dragged from her own mother's wake. You threatened us. You weaponized the police against us. And you did it because you think you can get away with it. My voice drops to a razor-sharp whisper. But I promise you, Karen, you won't. Karen swallows hard. I didn't know. I take out my business card and press it into her frozen hand. You do now. Karen stares at the business card in her hand, her fingers gripping it so tightly that her knuckles turn white. Her mouth opens, but no words come out. She looks between me and Maya, calculating, trying to regain her footing. Then she scoffs. The arrogance creeps back into her expression like a mask slipping into place. So what? She says, forcing a laugh. You think throwing around your fancy title scares me? You're just another government employee. You don't control the HOA. I do. She turns to the security guards, straightening her blazer like she's still in control. Remove them. Now. The guards hesitate. They've been watching the room shift. The guests are no longer just silent spectators. Anger is brewing, low murmurs, disapproving stares. Even the funeral director, who had been hesitant before, now steps forward. Mrs. Whitmore, he says, his voice firm. The Carters have a contract. They paid for this service. You have no legal standing to interfere. Karen glares at him. I have every right to ensure that neighborhood rules are enforced. This is a residential community, and we cannot allow. She stops herself just short of saying something damning. But everyone knows what she meant. We cannot allow people like you to disrupt our community. I exhale slowly, letting the silence stretch, letting her feel it. Then I smile. Karen, I say smoothly, I hope you didn't file that complaint officially. She stiffens, because now she sees the trap. I turn to the security guards. You said you were acting on an HOA complaint. I assume there's documentation, a formal request. The guard with the mustache nods, but he looks uneasy now. Yeah, it was emailed to us this morning. I glance at Karen. Did you file that complaint in your name? Or did you forge the HOA board's approval? Her face drains of color. Maya crosses her arms, fire in her eyes. Because I know for a fact the HOA board didn't vote on this. She turns to the guests, locking eyes with one of the women in the front row. Mrs. Daniels, a longtime resident and an HOA board member. Did you approve this, Mrs. Daniels? The elderly woman's lips purse in disapproval. Absolutely not, she says. This is the first I'm hearing of it. A murmur ripples through the crowd. Karen is unraveling. I acted within my authority as president, she stammers. I don't need board approval for emergency decisions. I step closer, lowering my voice just for her. Emergency decisions, I repeat, watching her squirm. Karen, you filed a false complaint to remove a grieving family from a funeral. That's harassment. That's discrimination. I pause, letting the final nail sink in. And that's illegal. She stares at me, chest rising and falling too quickly, trapped like an animal in a corner. I continue, my voice calm but sharp. I could have you arrested for filing a fraudulent complaint. I could sue you personally for discrimination and defamation. And if I dig deeper, and trust me, I will, who knows what other HOA violations I'll find. HOA fraud is a felony, Karen. Her breath shudders. The funeral director, sensing the tides have turned, steps forward. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Now. Karen flinches. You can't do that. He gestures to the security guards. Actually, I can. This is my establishment. And you're trespassing. The mustached guard exhales, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah. We're gonna have to ask you to leave, ma'am. Karen's eyes dart around the room, looking for an ally. but there are none. The people who once feared her are now staring with barely concealed disgust. She turns to Todd Hastings, the board member who had whispered to her earlier. "Todd," she pleads, "say something." But Todd only steps back, hands up. "You did this to yourself, Karen." Maya exhales sharply, her grief momentarily forgotten. Justice is unfolding right in front of her. Karen's face contorts, her lips trembling. She's about to lose everything, and she knows it. I lean in one last time, lowering my voice to a whisper only she can hear. Tension breaks. "You tried to humiliate my wife on the worst day of her life," I say. "Now it's your turn." Karen lets out a strangled sound of fury. But there's nothing left to say. She turns, storms toward the exit, and slams the door behind her. The funeral home is silent for a long moment. Then Maya's aunt mutters, "Good riddance." And just like that, the Karen storms out of the funeral home. But I know this isn't over. People like her don't retreat quietly. They regroup, they plot, they lash out when their power is threatened. Sure enough, as soon as the doors shut behind her, I see her yanking out her phone. Maya watches her through the window, fists clenched. "She's calling the cops," she says, her voice tight. I nod. Good. Because Karen doesn't realize she's walking into her own destruction. The tension in the room lingers, but I turn to the mourners, my voice steady and reassuring. "We're going to finish this service," I say. "And if anyone interrupts us again, they'll be answering to me personally." Maya's aunt exhales sharply. "You sure about that, son? Because that woman's crazy enough to try anything." I give her a small, knowing smile. Let her try. And we resume. But outside, I see the flashing red and blue lights approaching. Right on cue. Karen is standing in the parking lot, gesturing wildly as she talks to two officers. I recognize them immediately. Officer Billings and Officer Tran. I've worked with them before. Solid guys. Fair. Not the type to be manipulated by a woman like Karen, no matter how much privilege she thinks she has. I step outside, calmly walking toward them. The air is crisp, the scent of fresh-cut grass and flowers clashing with the ugliness of what's happening. "She assaulted me." Karen's voice rises, shrill and desperate. "They threatened me. I was just doing my duty as the HOA president, and they forced me to leave." Officer Billings eyes her skeptically. "Ma'am, do you have any proof of this alleged assault?" Karen falters for a half-second, then tries to recover. "There are witnesses. The security guards. They'll tell you." Billings turns to the guards. "That true?" Mustache guard shakes his head. "Nope. She was harassing mourners at a funeral. The funeral director asked her to leave." Karen's face twists in frustration. "That's not." Officer Tran cuts her off. "Ma'am, you filed a complaint about this funeral being unauthorized. But I just got off the phone with the funeral home's management. The Carters had a legal contract. So that was false reporting. Which, as I'm sure you know." He pauses, letting the weight of his words sink in. Karen's jaw clenches. "That's ridiculous. I was just..." Additionally, Billings interrupts. "I checked HOA records on my way over. Your board didn't approve this complaint, which means you misrepresented your authority. That's an abuse of power, Mrs. Whitmore." Karen's mouth opens, but no words come out. I fold my arms, watching her unravel. "And it gets worse," I say casually, "because I made a call too." Her head snaps toward me. I hold up my phone. "Karen, do you know what happens when an HOA president files false reports, harasses homeowners, and uses intimidation tactics? Investigations happen." Her face goes completely pale. I turn to the officers. "You might want to check her financials. HOA fraud is a growing issue, and I wouldn't be surprised if we find discrepancies." Billings nods. "Already looking into it." Karen takes a step back, her breath coming in short gasps. "You can't do this," she whispers. Maya crosses her arms. "Oh, but we can." The second funeral home doors open, and Mrs. Daniels, the HOA board member, steps out, arms crossed. "I've already contacted the rest of the board," she announces. We're holding an emergency vote to remove you as president. Effective immediately. Karen's body sways like she's been struck. You can't just fire me. I built this HOA. I am this community. Mrs. Daniels sighs. No, Karen. You were just in charge long enough to poison it. That's when the final blow lands. From the other side of the parking lot, a local news van pulls in. A reporter steps out, adjusting her microphone. I see Todd Hastings, the board member who abandoned Karen earlier, walking toward her. Karen notices too. Todd? She gasps, hope flickering in her eyes. But Todd doesn't even look at her. He speaks directly to the reporter. Our HOA president was just caught harassing a grieving family at a funeral. He says into the mic, she filed fraudulent complaints, abused her position, and repeatedly targeted minority homeowners. The board is taking immediate action to remove her and review all her past violations. Karen makes a strangled noise. Todd, you. But he walks away without another word. The reporter turns to Karen, microphone extended. Mrs. Whitmore, do you have a response to these allegations? Karen looks at me, desperation in her eyes. Please, she whispers. I didn't mean. I stare at her, expression unreadable. Karen, I say softly, you meant every word. And with that, I turn away, because Karen is finished. And she knows it. Karen stands frozen in the parking lot, her face a mask of pure disbelief. The camera's red light blinks as the reporter waits for a response. But for the first time in her life, Karen Whitmore has nothing to say. Then, as if reality finally catches up, she stumbles backward. No, this isn't happening. But it is. The officers exchange a glance. Officer Billings sighs, pulling out his radio. Dispatch, we're going to need a fraud investigator on site. Karen's head snaps up. Fraud? Fraud? I didn't steal anything. This is my HO. My rules. My community. Officer Tran shakes his head. And that's exactly the problem, ma'am. The crowd murmurs. Neighbors, ones who had stayed quiet for too long, whisper among themselves. Some look ashamed, others angry. But the shift is clear. The spell Karen had over this neighborhood is breaking. The funeral home director steps forward, his face tight with controlled anger. I'm pressing charges for harassment and trespassing. Maya's aunt follows. I want her investigated for discrimination. More voices join in. People Karen had tormented with fines, threats, and fake HOA rules. Her power wasn't just slipping, it was gone. Todd, the same board member who once stood beside her, delivers the final blow. Karen, your bank statements are already being reviewed, he says coldly. Any missing funds, any embezzlement, we will find it. Her hands tremble. She looks at me, desperation creeping into her voice. Please, she whispers. You don't have to do this. I tilt my head. You didn't have to do this either, Karen. But you did. For a long moment, no one speaks. Then Officer Billings sighs. Mrs. Whitmore, we need you to come with us for questioning. The moment the cuffs click around her wrists, the weight of it all finally crashes down on her. She screams, thrashing. No, I built this neighborhood. You need me. You'll regret this. But no one stops them as they guide her toward the police car. And just like that, it's over. The funeral resumes. This time without interruptions. Maya stands at the front, speaking about her mother with a voice full of love and sorrow. I watch her, my hand in hers, feeling the warmth of her grip. Stronger now. Outside, the sun starts to set, painting the sky in streaks of gold and violet. Neighbors approach us after the service, some hesitant, others earnest. We should have spoken up sooner, one man admits, rubbing the back of his neck. Karen. She had us all scared. She controlled everything, a woman adds. The fines, the permits, even the social events. We thought it was just how things were. I nod, understanding. But I also make it clear, that ends today. And it does. Karen is removed from the HOA board. An audit begins. Fraud charges are pending. Investigations reveal years of financial mismanagement, secret deals, and outright theft. Within a week, Karen's house goes up for sale. By the end of the month, she's gone. And this community changes. People who once lived in fear of Karen's wrath start reclaiming their neighborhood. They speak up. They stand together. The HOA, once her personal kingdom, is now in the hands of those who actually care. One evening, as Maya and I sit on our porch, watching the streets settle into peaceful quiet, she sighs. "You really did that," she murmurs. I squeeze her hand. We did. For the first time in a long time, everything feels right.